Jackie Fernley from Mason Stevens, welcome to the Growth Symposium.
Thanks, Drew.
Where do you see the biggest risks lying within portfolios in 2023 and beyond?
If you'd asked me this 4 weeks ago, I would have said we'll see a recession sometime at the back end of 2023 and a slow grinding bear market where you just get disappointing economic data and it just slowly grinds down, and we might have seen a recession into 2024. And that may still hold true. However, the last 4 weeks we've seen this banking crisis, and realistically, what does that mean? It means that we will see tighter financial conditions come through over the coming weeks and months. That really essentially brings forth that recession, potentially makes it deeper and increases the probability of a recession coming. So unfortunately, from a portfolio perspective, that really means you want to be underweight risk assets or growth assets. You want to be really careful in terms of anything that has complicated debt structures, because the risks associated with refinancing are high. So from a regional banking perspective in the US, one of the key pieces of information to know is that 80% of property, commercial real estate, is funded by regional banks in the US, in that country. And so that dynamic means that you really don't want passive REIT exposure, and you want to be underweight your risk assets, and you might start to think about gold.
We've seen a lot of unprecedented, with quotation marks, events in the last few years. Does that warrant a different approach to building portfolios?
Unprecedented is an interesting word. There's certainly been a lot of left tail risks in COVID, etc., and it's been a certainly volatile couple of years. If you just think back, since 2020, we've seen the shortest bear market in history, with COVID coming through, one of the most aggressive bull markets thereafter into the end of 2021, and then we've started this slow grinding bear from 2022, and that'll probably be with us for the next year or so. Does it change anything? I don't think it really changes anything. It's noisy, it's volatile, and I'm certainly pleased that I'm managing capital in an MDA environment such that we can make investment decisions and we can implement them without too much friction in the path, and that really does deliver better client outcomes. But generally speaking, those left tail risks don't change that much. What really changes is the regime that we're in any particular time. And when I talk about regime, I think about the dynamics between inflation and growth and the direction and combination of those dynamics at any particular time. So we go from a Goldilocks environment, which is when inflation is contained and growth is strong, to reflation, where growth is strong and inflation is high, through down to inflation, where inflation is up but growth is down, and then into this deflationary environment that we're just hitting, where growth and inflation come down. That's not a great environment, and it's about those regimes that drive volatility in markets. The rest is just noise.
I think that's a good segue to talk about MDAs into what advisors should have front of mind in this environment.
Yes, I think from an advisor perspective, it's very important to always remember that your strategic asset allocation and your dynamic asset allocation are both there for a reason. It's designed to work in the different regimes. And it is important to consider just what your investment process is and stick to your knitting. Some of the hardest or the commonplace things that I've seen is investors and advisors pulling money out of markets in a risk-off environment, but then getting money back in is really difficult. And so through the other side of the cycle, you then are underinvested. And that has real implications for wealth accumulation over multiple years. So an MDA setting is really important in that those decisions and that investment process is made in an investment committee setting. It's less emotive, and you've got steady hands on the tiller. essentially means that you won't get to that point where you're underinvested or overinvested. You will be running that investment process, and any change to portfolios and decisions that are made in an investment committee setting are done at scale simultaneously. So it's a more comforting environment from my perspective, at least.
And what are some of the more interesting developments occurring in the platforms or even the investment space at the moment?
Yeah, when I look at the market, and as a long-standing bottom-up fundamental equities investor, it's very difficult for me not to look at the wealth space or the platform space and think through the different business models. I think if you're a traditional wealth practice that is trying to scale, then the advice tech tools and the workflow tools that you can get on a NetWealth and Hub are really compelling for that traditional model, because it speeds the way you work one by one with each client. From a Mason Stevens perspective, given our focus on managed discretionary accounts, our focus is entirely different. Our focus is on investment outcomes and supporting those model managers in an MDA environment. And so our focus, as a consequence, is all about portfolio analytics and improved investment outcomes. So our technology platform is focused on an integration with an external provider, which is Jacoby Analytics, in a cloud-based open API framework. So we've built storyboards for different types of analytics within that system in an open API into and out of Massa, which is our platform. And so we've actually been able to now bring portfolio analytics that are institutional quality and grade into a wealth environment at scale. So that's very different to a traditional model and the traditional focus of those platforms.
And back to the cycles, has this kind of connectivity sped up the 4 cycles and how quickly we're going through them?
Some days it feels like that, and I would think in the context of Silicon Valley Bank and the demise of it, the run on the bank and watching the Twitter sphere and Facebook, etc., light up was really interesting. And in that context, I would absolutely say that the social connectivity and mobile banking in that context certainly changed the way in which that occurred, and the other banks that experienced runs thereafter. But from the economic cycle per se, I still think it's back to the regime, inflation and growth, and which direction. And if anything was really changing that dynamic, it's the unconventional monetary policy that we've seen from central banks since the GFC that's really changed those outcomes, really changed the volatility in markets.
Jackie Fernley, thank you.
Thank you.